So it's lesson 4, part 2. So we've added our HTML5 input validation, but now we're going to need to deal with validation on our save page. So where in this page, where should we be doing our server-side validation? So we're going to need to add stuff into what we've already done. Where would you put it? We could put it after the PDO. That would be one possibility. And so you're thinking somewhere else. Where would you put it? Put it up here. Okay, I would tend to agree putting it here. Why would it maybe make more sense to put it before the database connection rather than after the database connection? Right, the database connection takes overhead. So if the inputs are no good, there's no point. We don't need the database, we're not saving. So we probably can validate up here. Now it's possible to try and validate everything all at once, but it's not advisable because we've got several different rules and we need to show the user a descriptive message for everything that's wrong with their input. So we're probably best to validate one item at a time. So the first thing we want to validate is simply that the name field isn't empty. So what might this look like? Well, if something. So how could we check this variable? There's a few different ways we could check it. PHP has a few useful functions. Yep, so PHP has, it's a good suggestion, actually has an empty function, which my code recognizes. The empty function takes one parameter, which is what value are we evaluating? So if our name variable is empty, what should we display to the user? Sure, it's a good descriptive message. So that'll take care of this validation. What do we want to do with our year founded? So remember, on the form, it isn't required, but if we have a value, that value's got to be between 1,000 and the current year. So this one will be a little more complex. Okay. So how would we represent in PHP? How do you suppose you'd represent or? We're going to have two conditions. Yeah, so the pipe symbol. So that'd be the same as what you would use in Java. So if it's less than 1,000 or is greater than . So if either of these conditions are true, what do you want the error message to say? Okay. Now, right now, it's not going to be very easy for us to test this with our form, because if we break any of these rules, the form isn't going to submit. So we have a couple of ways we can test this. We could either create another form to submit, or we could temporarily undo our changes to our form. We could roll it back to where it was at the beginning of class by removing those validations, and then make sure our validations on the server work and put those back. So we'll have to test this out. So what I'll do here, I'll just undo all my changes for now, and then I'll redo them. So I'll just hit my undo. So I'm going to temporarily remove it. Once we make sure that all of this code is working, we'll put the validation back. The only other way to test this is to use some kind of tool like this one so that we could do our post from here. But I don't think anybody has a tool like Postman on their machine. We won't spend time installing it right now. The other thing you could do is make a copy of this page, save it, and take the validation out. So we have one copy with the validation and one copy without, just for testing. So I'll save these two files. I'll reload my form so that it now has no validation. If I click save. So we get name is required, which is good. However, we did get our second validation message as well. Why did we get this message? I didn't break the rule, really. Right, it does all it's checking is that value between 1,000 and 2020. So a null value means it's not in that range, so our message is going to show. If we're not requiring year, then we need this to be inside of another condition. We need to nest this. What's that other condition going to look like? Right. We only want to check the numeric value if the user entered a year. So if our year counted, so we're going to nest this inside. Only if we have a year value do we need to check that it's in the proper range. If they didn't type a year, we don't care. So that should fix that problem. If I resubmit, I no longer get an issue with the year unless I put in a year that's out of range. Now, the way these error messages are printing also doesn't look very good, does it? What could we do so that the error messages are stacked vertically rather than being printed one beside the other? Well, remember, we're right. It's in the browser, so we want to do the equivalent of /n, but we need the HTML tag. What does a line break in HTML? Yeah, we'll just append on a BIR tag. So this way, each error message will show up on a new line. So we won't really worry about the website. There isn't a clean and simple regular expression for validating this in PHP. We could spend the rest of class on that, which I don't want to do. Now, there's one other problem. Which is every time I've been testing my validation, we're getting those error messages, but what's wrong? Yeah, it's still saving to the database. So even when I print a message, so if I put in 2000 as the year, it'll show me names required, year is wrong, but still saving this to the database. So even though we're showing the user these messages, all the rest of this code, it's still executing, which we don't want. So how can we fix this so that if there are any validation errors, our save code doesn't run? That is a great suggestion. That's exactly what we're going to do. So we'll create a new variable. We'll keep it nice and short. We'll call it OK. And why don't we default it to true? So anytime one or more of our validation conditions gets triggered, what are we going to do with that variable? Yeah, thank you, John. We're going to toggle it to false. And then before we run any of the code involving the database, we can evaluate OK. So in here, if the name is empty, we're going to set OK to false. Same in this condition. Anytime we're printing a validation error, we're going to set OK to false. So then what do we need above line 32 to make sure our database connection and insert only runs if there were no errors in the inputs? You got it. So we can just check because OK is a Boolean. We're going to wrap all the rest of our remaining code, connects, saves, and prints an artist save message. That now happens inside of this if condition. I've moved everything else we had inside of this condition. So now save is only going to run if we have a name and if the user gave us a year that year is within the allowable range. So now if I submit my form again with an invalid year and no name, we should get 2 error messages printing. And if I go and refresh my list, we shouldn't see anything new being created in the database. This is only going to run if we didn't encounter either condition. So we'll try one more time. So now I get 2 validation errors. I don't get that artist save message being printed. And if we go back and look at the list, we're no longer saving an incomplete or invalid record. I guess.
If naming variable true, then the website is wonky, then won't still.
It will right now. Yes, it will still save. What we could do, I guess, one simple check is we could at least check that if there is a if website is not empty, we could at the very least check that the first 4 characters are HTTP. It's not a complete check, it would be a partial check. That would be one way of doing it. So we could look at that. And again, first we need to check if it's not empty. I haven't done this for a while, so I have to think about the PHP string function we want to use. I don't think there's a left function. There isn't. Okay, we can use Let's see. We think we can use substring. So the first parameter is what string are we looking at? Where are we starting? And how many characters? If it doesn't start with HTTP, we'll try this. We may have to modify it. We probably also would need to convert this to lowercase as well in case they put in any uppercase characters. But we'll try it and see. It's not perfect. It's a start. I'll see for next week if we can find a better way, more complete way of doing this, but we'll try this out. Okay, so it says website is invalid with I'm going to think about this one a little bit more. Yeah, we would. Thank you. That should fix the problem. So nice to have such smart debuggers. Thank you, Leo. So if the first 4 characters are not HTTP, it'll throw an error. Well, obviously, that isn't fully validating that it's a proper URL. So we can probably come up with something better. We'll start with this maybe proper one next week. I'm not the world's greatest regular expression writer, I fully admit. So I could try and write this. It would take me the rest of the day, night, weekend, probably all next week. So that's a start. And if we leave the website blank, then that's fine. This validation doesn't run if it's blank. But if there's something there, we're at least checking the first 4 characters are HTTP. So we'll leave it at that for now. So now we've got at least some validation so a user can't get around our form and submit bad data, which we're then going to wind up saving to the database. Now I should probably make sure if I fill this out completely that my save code still runs. I've tested with bad data, but did we break it with good data? Obviously, I've got a bunch of junk in here I'll have to delete. If I add something else, just guessing. So if I fill it out properly, it shows me that it was saved. And it adds it to the database. So we will improve that validation around our website, but most of the rules we have are here. So in your assignment, you'll need to figure out what validation rules make sense, depending on what you're doing. So most of the field should probably be required in your form. You can't get around the requirement by saying, I'm not going to validate anything. Anybody can just submit any blank data. So most or all of the fields should be required. And depending on what those fields are, you should validate that the rules make sense. If you're asking for a date value, the date can't be February 31st, for example. So now that we've tested this on the server, I can redo all of my validation here. So I'll put my required back and my type equals number with my min 1,000 and max. Here I'll add my type equals. So it's probably a good idea to write your validation on the server first, because then it's easy to test. Don't put any validation in your form. Write the validation in your save page, check all the rules, make sure that things are validated properly before you save. Once you have this validation working, then go and do your front-end HTML5 validation afterwards. So with these two things combined, it should prevent us from getting bad data saved to our tables. This is very often a conversation when you're designing your forms that you have to have with the client. And you have to ask them, when I'm building this form, what fields do you require? What fields can I make optional? And are there rules around certain things? Like maybe they say, no, I don't want artists, I don't want Beethoven. So I only want, say, from 1950 on. Anybody before that, we don't want users to be able to add to this. So it's often a conversation, and we need to know because we've got to figure out what does the validation look like. And those requirements are often going to come from whoever actually owns the application, if it's not our own. So what we've done here is basically what you have to do in your assignment. I want to see validation to get full marks for the validation. There's 8 marks. 4 of the marks are for this part, for validating in your form with HTML5. And the other 4 marks are for validating on the server with PHP code as well. So I want to see both. Does anybody have any questions in regards to either kind of validation? Okay, what are you thinking specifically?
For example, like a tester right now, your artist list would be vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Permanent cross-site scripting. You would be able to store them in database.
Okay, so let's try that. Something like that.
Exactly. That would be more HTML. Same technique you could inject out. Yes, that's HTML injection, but using the same technique to get JavaScript injection as well.
Yep, we could.
It's simple to fix. Just HTML encoding before you enter it into that.
So we could. It depends on our form. In many cases, we actually want to allow people, if they're entering content, we want to allow HTML if it's pardon?
That's dangerous.
Well, if you're, that's typically the only way people can enter content. So something like this, yes, we wouldn't want to allow it on here. So we could use HTML encoding here as well. So before we save, so we could even encode it here. Okay. So how would you want to do it? What method would you use?
I'm not a PHP guru, but I'm pretty sure it must be built in.
There is.
There must be a way to do
So we can try this, convert all characters. Well, actually, this does the opposite. That converts everything to HTML. So we may want to use HTML entity decode. Let's see what this gives us.
There's a function called HTML special chart. You just feed the strings back.
Okay, let's try it on. It's a good suggestion.
It's just one word, HTML special chart.
So this gets special charge decode. Let's see what that does.
I think you want to encode it because you would want to convert any special character. You want to encode it.
It doesn't recognize that. All right, let's see. We'll try it. So let's make a new one.
There you go. Now it's encoded. If you look at the source, you would see.
Yep, so the tags.
Yeah, the tags are encoded now.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Thanks, Lou. I like that idea. Right, so it'll convert that into the encoded equivalent. So we don't have to worry about that in the year because the year is only going to accept the number anyway. User can't actually. HTML5 prevents the user from putting text characters in. Right. That's right, because it's that condition would get triggered if somebody put in H1 2000. Okay. All right. That's better. Thank you for the suggestion. That's a good improvement. Okay, so the last thing I want to do with this, I think we might end a bit early today, is improve how this looks, which is terrible. Now, I noticed in a lot of Lab 1, a lot of people did their own CSS. Several people used the CSS framework, which is great. What I'm going to do with this, and some of you have used a bit before, but we'll use to make this application look better, is I'm going to add Bootstrap. How many people have worked with Bootstrap before? Many? What is it? There is JavaScript involved, yes. Excellent answer, thank you. So this is the world's most popular CSS framework. Okay, it's designed to be mobile responsive. There's all kinds of, so if we just basically add in the Bootstrap CSS, it gives us an easy to customize and work with CSS framework. And then typically we add our own styles on top of it. But this way we don't have to start by writing all the styles ourselves. So there's a few ways we can do this. If we click on getting started. So the simplest way, and I'll show you too, I'll do the simple way first. So the simple way is it says, just copy this line. So from Get Bootstrap, I just clicked on Get Started. And it says, if you copy this, it links to the Bootstrap CDN. What's a CDN? Right, so it's on a cached server. If we copy this, I'll just copy this line. And I'll open up first of all, we'll open the artist list page. And in my header, I'll just paste it in. So if I go and refresh my page, it's now going to add some formatting. It changes our font, adds some padding to the cells. So this is one way, is just simply add the link to it. But yeah, so it has tons of CSS. So if I look at the actual file, and it's got, this is the minified version, you can't read it, right? It's compressed for speed. There's the whole file. So it has classes for kind of almost any CSS element you think of. So if we go to examples, so it has tables, it has nav bars, it has buttons. It's got all of these different components are built into that CSS. So we can use any of these classes. So for example, we're going to want to use the nav bar class to generate a mobile responsive navigation bar. So the easy way is just link to it directly. So now we can use some of the classes. So if in my artist list, instead of having a border equals 1, I want to use some of the Bootstrap classes. So I'll take out the border equals 1, and instead I'll add class equals, for starters, table. So I know I've worked with Bootstrap for a while. I don't know all the classes in there, but I know some of the ones I've reused. So there's a table class. If we reformat our table, it makes it automatically, that table class is 100% width, so it will fill the container that it's in. There's also a class in there, a useful class called table striped. What do you suppose that class will do visually? It'll give us alternating background colors on the rows so that the table is easier to read visually. So it alternates, it leaves the plain background on even rows, gives us a gray background on odd rows. There's one more class I'm going to add to it. What do you suppose table hover, what kind of effect would that have on the visual? Okay. So if I refresh, right, that row gets highlighted as I scroll. So this is just the default style sheet. I could override this. So let's say, for example, I want the alternating background colors, but I don't like the color Bootstrap has chosen. I want to use a different color instead of this. Well, it's gray on my monitor. It looks kind of pink here. So if I want to overwrite it, I can create my own style sheet and create my own definition of table striped. And override it if I choose. Or I could change the default font. You notice when we added Bootstrap, it changed the font. If we don't like that font, we can still use something else in our own style sheet. So we typically will use Bootstrap for the basic components and mobile responsiveness, and then we'll still write our own style sheet that has our own custom colors, fonts. So it doesn't look, every Bootstrap site doesn't look exactly the same. We still need to brand it according to our own purposes with the right colors and fonts, for example. So we can also use Bootstrap in our form. Doesn't look very good. So I'm going to open up my artist form and add a link here too. So I'll add the link in the header, and if I refresh my form, our field set lines go away. We can see the fonts taking effect. So we can see some of the common components here. So for example, there's an element called an alert. So when we want to print a message on the page, and it gives us 8 different color choices that we can use. So we'll want to use this one, for example, to print error messages. So we'll maybe add this class as well to our save page. If there's any validation errors, it will display them using this class in red. So we've got components. Let's say we've got a button. So here are the Bootstrap buttons. So maybe we want to use one of these classes. So we've got BTN and then BTN. So primary is the blue. You can see the different classes. So on our form, we want to reformat our save button to use one of these. I mean, you can use any class you like. Do you have a suggestion of which class we might want for our save button? Okay, so if we use BTN and then BTN-primary, our save button is going to get changed to look like this one. So in here, I can add a class equals so that should make our button blue and change the text from black to white. Also round some of the corners. So you don't have to make it blue. You can use anything you like. There's also some classes here for forms. So we might want to align things on our form, like make all our labels the same width, so all our text boxes are stacked vertically. See if they give us an example. So we want something like this. So inside of my label, we'll add some classes. Now, Bootstrap has a grid system. It basically lays out every page into 12 columns. And those column sizes are also responsive to different screen resolutions. So we can have small, medium, or large. So if we want certain elements to all be the same width, we can say, for example, we have 3 labels on our page on lines 11, 13, 15, and 19. If we want to make all those labels the same width, we can make them all the same number of columns. And that will push all of the inputs that are beside them so that the left's align. So we can try maybe a call. We'll say each label is 2 columns wide. So I'll attach this class to each one of my labels. This may work, it may not. CSS is largely trial and error. We try a class, we see how it looks. If we don't like it, we adjust it. So each one of these, this should give it the same width. We'll see how that works. Okay. So that aligns them. Now we also want to align I'd like to align my button over here. It doesn't really make sense to have the button over here. We don't have a label beside the save button, but we want to push it so it basically also starts in the 3rd column. The first 2 columns will be blank. So we can also add another class in our button. And what we want to do is offset it by 2 columns. So basically put 2 columns to the left of this button as padding on the left side and push the button over to the 3rd column because our 3 text boxes all start in the 3rd column. of our grid system. Okay, that didn't work where I wanted it to. Let's see if we can. Bear with me. I'll figure it out. Oh, they've changed the class. Okay. I think the class name is now, I was using a Bootstrap 3 class. We'll try this. So offset the button by 2 small columns. There, that moves it over. And maybe the last thing we want to do is just add simple headings to these pages. So on my form, I'll put on an H1 that says artist details, and on our list, we'll put on an H1 that says artists or artist list above the table. The users know what they're looking at. Up here. So now we've got the details. Now we've got my list. I just added H1 tags right inside my body tag for each of these. So you can use the CDN for Bootstrap. That file should always be available. You can also download a copy of that file and include it in your project locally. And there is one benefit to doing this. And I'll show you both versions. So what I'm going to do in my project, I'm going to create first a CSS subfolder. So I'll create a directory called CSS. And I'm going to go and take a copy of the compressed CSS file. I'll download it. So I'll just copy that link. Open a browser tab. And here's the CSS. So I'm going to save this into my CSS directory. If I hit Control S, I'll go to my music library. I'm just going to save it in here. So either method will work. There's one big benefit, though, to saving it locally. So let's say I want to add it to my save page as well, so that we can use, if we have any error messages, we can print those and we can style them. So I'm going to link to my local version on this page. So it's the exact same file, but one I'm using the Content Delivery Network online. The other one I actually have a local copy of. Here's the benefit of storing it locally. Let's put on H1. If I want to add a class, notice because the file is local, my code editor actually recognizes all the classes. So I get the code hinting. It shows me what everything in here I might want. So if I want as a, alert info, so it's in Actually, no, I won't put this message not on my 8th one, but I want to put it down here in my artist saved message. Class equals. So when you have the CSS locally, if you're using WebStorm, I'm not sure if Visual Studio Code will do this or not, it can read what all those classes are in your CSS file. When you use the CDN, your code editor can't inspect what's in the file and give you prompts for all of those classes. And this should probably be an H2. So now if I save a new artist, rather than it just printing the text artist saved, I should have a blue background. It should be blue text against a light blue background with this alert info message. Or actually, maybe I want to make it green. There's a success class where everything's green. There's a danger class where everything is red. So I'll try this, try and save an artist. We'll see what it looks like. Oops. So now I get that alert success class here. So it's not required to use it locally. You can use the CDN or you can use it locally. I find it's kind of convenient. It helps with coding to have it locally because then I can see all the classes in there. To show you an example of what this might look like with an actual site. So here, Bootstrap is used for the main CSS and to make it mobile responsive, for example. So Bootstrap includes things like this little mobile friendly navigation, this pop-out menu, which you can't see because I'm not logged in, so there's no options in there. But then there's also a custom style sheet. You notice it's different font, has different fonts and different colors. So the fonts and colors are matched to the brand of the site owner. But if we view the source of the page, we'll see there's two different links. Here's the link to Bootstrap. This is an older version, it's version 3. And then this is a custom style sheet where we've defined our own classes, own fonts that will override Bootstrap. So we're using a combination. Bootstrap provides the foundation, and then we have a custom style sheet over top of it. Actually, so most of this site I built with some students, and then I hired Jessica to do all the custom CSS. So we asked the client what they want for CSS, and Jessica did this. So I put Bootstrap in, and that's as far as I can go. I can't really do much effective customizing with CSS. So then I had a designer do the rest of it. So ultimately, the client gets what they want, but Bootstrap does some of the work, reduces a lot of the manual CSS, and we just customize on top of it. So you can see the different kind of examples here and what things we can do, mostly under components. So if we want something like list, so they've got some different lists. How do we make an item in the list active? They have classes for this. And different ways of formatting. This is another common one that's come out in Bootstrap 4 is we have this card class, and we might use this. So something like this. So for each element, each record we want to show, we put it in a group, and we might include, for example, an image and different text elements. So this would be a simple card. And all of the CSS is here, so it shows you what HTML we would need if we want to be able to render. So we may want to show our artist card in cards like this, where we can show a picture, show the artist name as a heading, and then show some other information in a link. So we're allowed to, this is an open source library, so we can just use any of this HTML anywhere we want in our application. So one of the other things we're going to want to use is this nav bar. So there's several different nav bars here, and we'll want to pick one and include it in our site. And again, we can customize the color or write our own color if we want to brand it according to whatever we're doing. Okay, it's 10:05. We've got a couple of options now. We've actually managed to do everything I wanted to do today. I had planned this for another lesson where we could build a header for our site with a navigation bar and a footer, and then we can share that header and footer on all the pages. Right now, all our pages are individual, so there's really no way for a user to navigate the site. So I was planning to do that later, but we have a fair bit of time, so I will give you two choices, and I'm fine with either. I can set you free, and you can start your weekend early, and we can do this later on, or we can add in a header and footer to our site today, which would give us more time to do other stuff later. I'm good with either. Whatever you guys would like to do, I'm all ears. Okay, you're welcome to start your weekend early. Okay. No lab this week, but get started on assignment 1. Okay. So you can make an appointment and get help next week. Individual. So build something that is your own. Okay. I will stick around for anybody who has questions. We got lots of time. So give me a minute to put my streams up and push my code, and then I'm happy to help whoever needs help.